Yeah, nice to see you again. How are you?
Good to see you. I'm good. How about yourself?
Yeah, good, good, good. Yeah, looking forward to the summer. I'm heading down to Nashville, so I don't know if you're going to be there, but I will
Yay, I
be.
will.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Okay. Because we're planning some Access Tribe event in partnership with some other women's networks as well. So I'll let you know when we've got that firmed up and we know all the details. Because
Wonderful.
it'd be nice to see you there. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm not sure if I'm actually attending the conference. I'm definitely going to be in Nashville, but at a variety of different events. So I'll see if I can actually make it to the conference during the day or not. But yeah.
Yeah, there's always like a conference underneath the conference. So,
Yeah, well, I've got to be
oh,
honest, last year I enjoyed the side events so much that I was like, oh, I might actually try and spend a bit more time doing the side events because it was just such good fun. So that's
it
the plan.
was. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. That's a good way to look at it. But yes, I'll be there. I think I'm going to come down early just to be down there for a few days and figure out, talk to people and see everyone. So
Nice,
whenever you're
nice.
there, let me know.
I will,
How long does it
definitely.
take for you to get to Nashville?
Oh, we're doing a whole big road trip, so it's actually just like a
Okay.
much longer holiday. Yeah, so
Okay.
it's a much more involved thing. So yeah, it does take a while, but it's an intentional while. Like I didn't want to just fly down for the event. I thought I'll actually do a nice road trip and do some sightseeing. So it's going to be a
Okay.
big
Good.
journey.
Good.
So I guess we should kick off then because I know who you are, but nobody else might, or not nobody, but I know who you are, but others might not know. So it'd be great to kick off with you just introducing who you are and maybe just give a brief background and then we can dive into your orange pill story and your mining story and everything else.
Sure. My name is Heather Pierce. I wear several different hats, but I got into I am a founder and partner in Proof Consulting, and then I am the executive director and founder of the Kentucky Blockchain Council, and then I also am an independent um, contractor with Compass Mining, and so I sell hardware through them, and I think that's maybe the bulk of it right now. I do site brokering. That's my other job. I guess that's my main job there. So I wear several different hats in the mining industry, and I kind of came into the mining industry um, from a job that I had here locally in Paducah, Kentucky, is where I'm located, and my background's real estate. I was offered a job in our economic development agency, so I went to work there to recruit companies to Paducah. And at that time, all the crypto mess started happening in China, and we were having an influx of calls to our agency for people to come to Kentucky. At that same time that things happened in China, Kentucky abated the sales tax for the miners, so it was a good time for miners to come to Kentucky. So I learned a crash course in crypto mining and what miners needed to do that, and so I help them find real estate, negotiate PPAs, do all of those things that they need to do. And so when I left that agency, I sort of walked into this world and sort of started from there.
That's amazing. What was your background in Bitcoin then? I mean, did is that how you came into Bitcoin or were you already interested in that space before all of these changes happened and China banned mining and so on?
No, honestly, didn't know much about it at all until I was working with them, every day and trying to help them find power and again, negotiating the PPAs with them and kind of working through those processes with the power companies. So that was really my really first dealings with crypto at that point.
That's so interesting that you came into it through that route.
Yeah,
Can you give some backstory on Kentucky then? What was Kentucky's reason for doing that? Because I know that people would be very familiar probably with Texas, probably with Wyoming as well, which are very friendly states to sort of digital currency in general and mining as well.
sure.
Where does Kentucky come into this and what's Kentucky's interest and background in it?
Yeah, I think Kentucky was just doing it to want to be friendly to the miners and to encourage them to come to Kentucky was the main reason for that. I mean, we have what I would say are decent power rates. We are not like Texas, at that point was, in the 3 to 4 cent range or, very low threes. And Kentucky has good power and we have opportunities there. And I would also say that we have bunch of coal plants that have shut down. So there was opportunity in that as well. But it was more of just an encouragement to get the miners here to Kentucky.
Oh, that's interesting. So it was an economic decision really to
Absolutely.
drive that adoption. That's really fascinating.
Absolutely.
So how did you get involved in Compass then? And can you talk a little bit about what Compass does?
Sure. So Compass, of course, has been around for years and very big in the industry, but they are a hosting company. They do hardware sales and also do operations. So they can help build your site and they can help operate your site for those people that are sort of wanting to have a site, but they don't know how to operate it or don't know how to get it all going. So that's sort of their gig. And honestly, I got into Compass because I very early on in my career here met Curtis Harris, who most people would know if they're in the mining industry, who is business development for Compass. And so he and I sparked a friendship. And so he felt like that was that's a good thing for me just to have as an independent contractor to have as a toolbox for site development. So that's sort of how I ended up there. And it's been an enjoyable experience for me. So it's a good thing for me to have to offer to my clients um, the Compass, the Compass product and their services there.
Oh, I see. So through Proof Consulting, which is your consultancy, you now have relationships with Kentucky as a state and with all of their infrastructure. But if somebody wants a site built, you actually then have a company that you can go to that you know that you represent and say, these guys can actually put in the hardware for you and run it if you want it.
Yes. Yeah.
Gosh, that's really
Mhm.
fascinating. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the Kentucky Blockchain Council. Said, was this inspired by the Texas Blockchain Council and how did you set it up? Like what's the structure?
Yeah. So that is mainly just my baby. I started that with another friend, and he runs a solar company in Lexington, and he, has got a lot on his plate, so he helps me sort of in the background. But um, we actually did fly down, talk to Lee and talk to Amy and their group, and kind of got, the guidelines of what we should do and shouldn't do, and worked through that. And but you know what I learned when I was helping those miners, when initially helping those miners, is that I had to educate people. I had to educate our local government. I had to help educate the community, really to people and help them understand what we were doing in the crypto industry. So I just have always been very strong about the fact that we have to educate and advocate for our industry. And so I really want to continue doing that across Kentucky. So that's why I've started it. I feel like we have to keep doing that. So I'm working towards that. We did get the UCC 12 amendment passed this past legislative session. We did get the
Can you just
Satoshi right
explain to
to,
people what that is?
but yeah, so it's more of like a code for the digital currencies, right? So it's sort of a nice definition for all of the states and to understand and define what that what currencies, what digital currencies are, if I can get my words out. Um, and what we're hoping is that all of the states will adopt that so that everyone has the same definition for the digital currencies. And so I think another state adopted it this morning, but about 20 states have adopted this amendment. So that helps us all have, the same ideas and same practices. Um, so we're all working towards that. The Kentucky Blockchain Council and most of the other blockchain councils as well um, belong to the U.S. Blockchain Council, which ARU runs as the executive director, and which is also under the Global Blockchain Council. So we all are working towards this education, advocacy, legislation piece that we all know that we need, and really want to be proactive about working for the industry.
Oh, so that's interesting. So they're basically setting standardized legislation for a state level, and then each group within each state is working to get that adopted so that you're kind of harmonized.
Well, that's that one piece is, and then each state is doing their own
Yeah.
thing basically. But that I would say that one piece we are trying to work on together because we feel like that's important to just get a nice, good definition of that.
That's fascinating. So how many of the states have blockchain councils now? So you've got Texas, you've got
Ooh.
you guys, and then who else?
Yes. I'm going to say that there are, there's, I would say most every one of them, but I would say maybe there's 40 plus of us that have a blockchain council now, or
Oh,
40 of the
wow.
states have a blockchain council now.
And are you all affiliated under that umbrella group to a certain extent?
Yes, under the US Blockchain Council, yes.
That's
And so
amazing.
really, and so Ari does a great job of really just kind of coordinating us, helping us understand, and helping us kind of, if this state's doing this, trying to see if that helps our state in any way. Every state is different in what their needs are and how that's going to operate, of course, but she helps kind of coordinate us and help direct us in what's going on. So it's a good way for us all to be in touch with each other across the states.
Yeah, that's right, because you can then learn from each other as well if you've
Yes.
had successes and things like that, or if things have been challenges. Can you talk about how you set the structure up in Kentucky then? Is it similar to TBC in the sense that you have businesses that are members that are domiciled in the state and operating in the state? And how do you kind of structure that? Like who's involved in the group and what activities, I guess, are you doing?
Sure, sure. Well, we're very new, so I'm trying to beginning to get those sponsorships. I am in the process of finishing up the 501(c)(6), so there will be sponsorship levels. So again, just like the TBC or any of the other ones, we will have a higher level sponsorship, and then for corporations, and then probably like a mid-sized one, and then another one that is for students or individuals that want to join as we go in. And events, I just honestly don't have anything set up just yet. So we're like just new. Like when I say new, like November new. So so I would say that stay tuned for that. How's that for an answer?
That's amazing. Well, that's great. That's really fantastic. Can you explain the designation? Because not everybody listening will know what a 501(c)(6) is or 501(c)(3). And so, like, what does that actually mean in Kentucky? And what does that allow you to do?
So that allows me to do fundraising, for not in a nonprofit status, so that I can go out and solicit funds.
Okay. And so that's a charitable state. How does that differ from a
That's correct.
501(c)(3)?
Um, the You're going to stump me on this one. This is what my accountant told me to do, and what Ari says to do. It's I think it's something about the political piece of that.
Oh,
So,
okay. Yeah, yeah, that
mhm,
makes sense. Yeah, probably the
mhm,
lobbying. Yeah, okay. No, no,
mhm.
no, that totally makes sense. Well, that's
Yes.
fantastic. And how friendly do you think for people who are not familiar with Kentucky, then the fact that they've tried to be friendly towards miners would indicate that they're kind of quite positive on Bitcoin. What's your sense being based there and operating in the Bitcoin industry? Like, how do you feel like the political structure? How receptive is it to Bitcoin, and where do you think that's headed?
Oh, that's a solid question. I think that, here's what I'll say. Down in Western Kentucky, core has been, core mining, the core has been here for a long time. Mining, they've been very successful here. I know they have, I believe, you know, I don't know, I'm going to say 20 plus employees. So they've been very positive for the workforce here in Kentucky. Um, we have several other large miners one in Eastern Kentucky, another one here in Paducah, Kentucky. Um, we have several smaller miners. So I think those have all been receptive. I know, we have had noise complaints, which is always a topic amongst the community members. Um, and
From the mining facilities, you mean?
Yes, from mining
Oh.
facilities. And it's but not always is that, so some mining facilities have it, some don't. It just really depends on how and where they're located. Um, but I do know that that was brought up when we went for legislation to the House for the Right to Mine bill, and we have to negate that all the time because the miners are very aware of the fact that their machines are noisy and they're trying to help with that. They know. Um, but I think that all in all, the Kentucky's been very proactive about it. The utility companies have been proactive about it. And I think that my experience this past legislation session was they were all, you know, very helpful to me. They were trying to get things passed. They were happy to help me. So I feel like the the political environment is, we want to help you, we want to figure this out, educate us on what's going on. So that's how I feel about that.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's great that they're receptive to it. So would you say that this particularly kind of favorable um, climate, political climate, if you
Yeah,
like, or legislative climate, does that extend primarily to miners, or do you think that there's a good opportunity for people running other kinds of Bitcoin businesses to come into the space, into the state?
I think it would pertain to everyone. I mean, why would it exclude them? I think everyone would be welcome into that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering if the benefits are primarily for miners, but whether there might be benefits for somebody running any other kind of Bitcoin business. I don't know, like an exchange, let's say, or something like that. Is there a reason why they might pick Kentucky over another jurisdiction potentially?
Oh, I'm not going to say there's like an advantage or any incentives for that right now.
They're not paying you yet at the tourist board and at the the
No,
economic
not
board.
yet. No, so probably need to work on that piece for them. Um, no, I would say we don't have incentives for, offering that. But, at one point I know, and I don't know what it is today, Kentucky has been even in the top three of hash rate at one time. So Kentucky is doing its part
Really?
as far as in the mining industry. Yeah.
Huh. That's really
So,
incredible. Wow.
yeah.
Um, so I'm curious then, what's the community like there? Do you have because you've started this blockchain council, you've got one person working with you on it.
Hmm.
I'm presuming that there are some meetups in Kentucky and so on, and you guys
Yeah.
are obviously reasonably close to Nashville, which is nice.
Hmm.
What's your sense of like the community there and what's it like? Is it very large? Are there lots of very active Bitcoiners? Can you describe that sort of aspect of Kentucky?
That's so funny that you should ask that because we were on that networking session the other day, and my very final square that I got was someone in Louisville that I never had met. And so it was very so fun to meet Tally that day because I was like, I didn't know you existed. And here we are on this networking session. And we're meeting someone, each other from Kentucky. So yeah, so there is a meetup in Louisville. There is one in Lexington. So where I am located, I'm 4 hours away from them.
Right.
But I do attend the Lexington meetup. Um, and on a regular basis, I normally drive to the Nashville meetup because it's a little bit closer to me, and it's a great crowd to be around as well. And so now I'll start attending the Louisville meetup with Hallie. And so she and I've had multiple conversations, and are planning to do a little bit of work together with her and Scott's game and their company. So we've had a few conversations from your get together a couple
I
weeks
love
ago.
it.
So thank you
I
for
love
that.
this is
Yeah,
this is the whole point of those networking events is to bring women together in this space so that they can work on projects. And we've had so many success stories of that, of people like starting projects together, being hired into different roles, organizing like meetings or business
yeah,
trips or things like that. So I'm really pleased about that because there's a ton of women in this space and many of them don't know each other. And so it's really nice when people meet and they're able to kind of, build that relationship. So I'm
yeah.
really
That was
glad that that
great.
worked out. Yeah, do you know what? I'm really kind of silly because I should have actually made the connection. I think I just assumed that you guys knew each other and I didn't think to make the introduction. So note to self as well that I'll try and keep those regional
No,
connections in mind.
that's fine. But I was just glad that it worked out, and so thank you for having your networking gig, and so it was very nice. And so I think that there is a group there, and then really just talking. There's just people that you just don't know about when that are even doing this in the industry. So um, and there's kind of people kind of hidden in um kind of up in the mountains that are doing some things as well that I know about. So they are scattered across the state. So, but
So
there is
that sounds
there's a
shady,
good amount of
hidden
people
hidden up in the mountains.
in the mountains. Well, there's mountains of Eastern Kentucky, and we're down here in the Western Kentucky. So if you're looking across our state, um, but it is. I think we've got a good group here, and it's kind of figuring out. It's something I struggle with really with the blockchain council is, we don't have obviously no crypto miner wants to be registered anywhere, and we don't want to have anybody doing that, and that's what we're about. But it's it's some way for me to figure out how to get in touch with them so that they can be a part. And have a voice and figure out how we can all be together and be in a community. So I don't really know how to reach all of them just yet, except through word of mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess once you start putting stuff out there as well, people will know that it exists. I mean, I'm a huge admirer of like what Lee Bratch has achieved in Texas. I mean, he's
Yes,
just relentless and it's really difficult and boring and tedious trying to get good policy through. And it's like you often do a lot of work and sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not. And the people that put the effort into doing that are often like very unsung heroes, you know. It's like everybody remembers the successes, but they don't see the
yeah, all the
hours
work
of
behind it.
yeah, like the hours of drudgery. I mean, sometimes when they sort of describe, you know, going office to office and, you know, having the same conversation over and over again. And I mean, I know like Dennis, what's his name? Dennis Porter as well with the Satoshi
Yes,
Action Fund. I mean, he's just flying around pushing these things one after the other
yes.
in different states. So it's really incredible actually. I think what can be achieved at a local level that then kind of creates a good set of competition because all of the different jurisdictions, all the states are competing with each other to be the most friendly and attract the most business. But it also puts pressure, I think, on the federal level to say, well, actually, you can't really do these things because now there's local legislation that supersedes that, and this is how it's going to operate at state level. So I think it's fantastic. I think it's
Yes.
definitely the way forward, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. It is hard work, but and you're right, Lee and his crew down there, and I mentioned Amy just because I know her by name, but I know he's got a big staff of people that help him now, and they have just done wonders down there. So
Yeah, it's been incredible. I am planning on going to the summit this year, by the way. So if you're there, I will be
good,
there. Yeah.
good.
So
Yeah,
I will hopefully, if I don't meet you in person, well, I'll see you in Nashville, actually. What am I
we'll
talking
see.
about?
Yeah,
I'll see you
yeah,
in Nashville, but if not, then I'll see you in Texas. Cool.
absolutely.
So I would love to talk to you a little bit as well about like women in this space because this comes up
Sure.
a lot and I tend to try and interview, I think 99.999% of the people I interview are women. Um, and I'm
Lovely.
just always curious about what their experiences are because you're doing a lot of this work from a legislative standpoint, you're working in the Bitcoin industry, you know, you're running your own consultancy. What do you think about the female engagement? And particularly, I'm interested as well in your day to day, sort of outside of the Bitcoin community. Like, how do you sort of see women engaging in Bitcoin, if at all?
So I guess, through my work, I'm always so excited, like when there are women at a conference that I know because there's someone for me to communicate with. So I'm always like, it's another woman. So happy about this. So, and so, yeah, I think other women feel that way because you're kind of in that position all day. So it's nice to have that, but really, quite honestly, I've always felt pretty welcomed in the community as a woman, with all of the men that I work with and talk to every day. So, but it is very obvious that you are the minority in that group when you're there at a conference or somewhere there. So yeah, it's kind of working through that. You know, I don't hear a lot of women talk about Bitcoin here. So um, I think that probably they aren't educated on it or don't understand it. And I say that too because when I'm out in a circle of people and they ask me what I do, moms of my daughter or something of that, and I start to say I do site development for Bitcoin miners, they just kind of glaze over. And so then I go, I also sell real estate. So and I just go back to that. I just let them think that I'm back into my real estate world. So because I just like it's a little bit easier for you. So because they don't understand and it's kind of very intricate to get into. So, but I think they haven't had that experience with it.
Why do you
Yeah,
think
with
that is?
someone.
Because it's interesting. I was running some stats on my social media the other day, and it's only by a tiny fraction. It's like 2%. But I actually have more followers and more engagement from men on social media than I do on women. And like the Access Tribe brand is very overtly female. And I find that really
Absolutely.
interesting. Yeah. And oftentimes when I get like subscribers to Access Tribe, I mean the community is a women's community, but anybody can subscribe to the free
Sure.
newsletter or anything else. I get so many men. And LinkedIn. I'd say 90% of the connection requests I get are from men.
Oh, wow. That is
Mm.
interesting.
Yeah. So I'm just curious as to why you think that they're not interested, because I have my theories about it, but
What is
I,
it?
well, I think there are biological differences. So, I
That's
did the
probably true.
five behaviors test like 3 years ago or something, whatever it was, 2, 3 years ago. And I score I rate on many scales as much more male in terms of the way my brain works than female. And so I suspect that that might be one of the reasons why I'm interested in Bitcoin. And I also score very high on openness, which is typically like an entrepreneurial trait.
Yeah.
But you tend to be kind of much more open to new experiences, new technologies, new things. Um, and so I think that's one of the reasons why I'm maybe more primed. And I spent 20 years in financial markets, so I've kind of seen the traditional finance arm and everything that's wrong with it. So I think I was kind of primed for it. But what I've realized about a lot of my audience is they're more interested in people than in things. And this generally tends to hold true for women versus men. Obviously, it's not an absolute, but if you
Yeah.
took, 100 women and 100 men, it would average out that
Mhm.
women were more interested in people than things. And I think a lot of women don't realize, because there's been such a heavy amount of propaganda, a lot of which I think is corporate and government driven, to say
Mhm.
that Bitcoin is shady, it's used by criminals and blah, blah, blah. People see
Yeah,
Elizabeth Warren bleating on about like, all this to Jamie Dimon, which is so
for sure.
ironic, about like, oh, the criminals using Bitcoin and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
The irony is just not lost at all on me. Um, but I think a lot of women, being a bit more risk aware, they tend to think, oh, okay, this isn't something I should be involved in. And what they don't hear about is the human rights applications, the fact that you can defund wars by moving to a Bitcoin standard. Like
Mhm.
there's all of these things that for me resonate a lot as well, that I think generally tend to resonate more with women, and women just aren't aware of this because the propaganda's just been so such that they haven't picked it up. And most of the discussion about Bitcoin and the debate tends to happen in venues like Twitter, which I've discovered that most women hate. Like most
Yeah.
women can't stand Twitter as a social media platform. And I did a lot of research when I launched Access Tribe on like what social media platforms women were using. And overwhelmingly, it was YouTube and it was Instagram. And then I asked them, what accounts do you follow on these things? And
Uh-huh.
overwhelmingly it was travel blogs and like animal sort of, cute pet things I'm following,
Cute
such as
pets, cute puppies.
Mhm. Yeah. And and it was things like diet things where somebody's like, and none of it was things like financial markets or economy, even if they were actually in financial markets and or economists. That's not what they follow
They
outside
didn't
of their.
follow it. That's
No, they don't
crazy.
seem to be interested in it outside of work hours. Whereas I notice with men, if their day-to-day job is like being an economist or being in financial markets, that's also what they're interested outside of work. It doesn't mean that they don't do other things.
Sure.
They would be interested in reading about that stuff. Whereas I got the sense with women that it was almost a bit more like, this is my job. And then outside of that, oh, I just want to do like some
What I
escapism.
want. Hmm.
Yeah, I want to look
That's
at like
interesting.
pretty pictures of boat trips. So I found that quite interesting. The one thing I think a lot of women do care about is kids. So I think they care about passing wealth on to their
Yes.
children, but because they don't understand Bitcoin, they don't understand how they can use that technology to do that and protect their kids' inheritance from inflationary monetary
But
policies and money
yes.
printing. So that's kind of my theory, but it's a hard thing to then overcome because you're demanding people's attention when they've already had a long day at work dealing with all the practicalities of like their jobs and then picking the kids up from school and like all of that
When they're
kind of
tired.
stuff.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and they want an outlet, and Bitcoin's not really an outlet. It's a discipline. It's something that you
Yes.
need to study, that you really need to kind of get involved in and spend a lot of time thinking about. So I think that that has a lot of the that's a lot of the driver for it. Would you agree?
I think that's a great theory. I mean, and you're right, because those women, I mean, women are carrying that mental load, so maybe they don't want anything else on their plate. And maybe they do feel like it's just more complex. And I would say too, women probably don't sit around and talk about financial items with their friends like that either. Like guys might talk about that.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true, which is odd, really. Like you kind of wonder
Yeah.
why. Somebody was saying to me that women spend a lot of money on personal care. So, things
Yes.
like going to a yoga retreat, going to a sound bath, going for a massage, but they won't spend that same amount of money on things like making investments and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Spend a lot of money on personal care. So, things
Yes.
like going to a yoga retreat, going to a sound bath, going for a massage, but they won't spend that same amount of money on things like making investments and that kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see that. So,
Yeah.
and maybe that's because other people see that stuff. Maybe they want to be seen. Maybe that's what it is. But like yeah, I can't like say that I would sit. I can't say that I've ever sat down with my friends and had a conversation about just finances. So, I think maybe that's just maybe a taboo subject, and maybe women just don't talk about it with each other.
Yeah, I don't know. It's quite fascinating. So back in the day,
It
I
really
was
is.
really into Robert Kiyosaki and I'd bought his or either I bought or my friend bought his game, the what was it called again? The thing for getting out of the rat race. Oh, what was his? He had a board game that was
Oh
kind of like
no.
Monopoly, but the
Okay.
point of the game was that you had to get out of the rat race. And
Okay.
you would be issued with a card at the start of it, which would be like, I don't know, you're a nurse, you earn $20,000 a year. These are your outgoings, blah, blah, blah. So you would start with certain things, or, you're a millionaire business owner, you own 5 properties, blah, blah, blah. This is like, but these are your outgoings. So there would be positives and benefits to every persona that you got dished out at the start of the game. And the point of
Sure.
the game was to then use your advantages to win and get out of the rat
Yeah,
race
to
as
get
quickly as
better. Yeah.
yeah, to get out of the rat race. And obviously, if you start off as a poor nurse, you do have much smaller outgoings. So you're not spending as much money. Whereas if you're the wealthy one, you've got more outgoings, even though you've got more income. But what I found really interesting was I used to play it with a group of friends, and we had a regular thing where we would do this
Yeah.
game, and it was really fascinating because people's personalities would just totally come out in those. Like I had a friend who was extremely risk averse and also
Uh-huh.
extremely negative about her situation in life. So it didn't
Yeah.
matter what persona she got
Oh
given
God.
at the start of the game, it was always like, oh, this is going to be terrible for me. And then when she was presented with opportunities to make investments that would have generated income, she wouldn't want to do them because she didn't want to take any money out of the bank. So eventually she would always end up poor at the end of the game and very rarely got out of the rat race. And this was like consistent. And I hope she's not
Which
listening to
fed
this,
her
but
negative attitude.
yeah, and overly like she just wasn't willing to take any kind of risk at all and therefore could never make any return. And then I had another friend who was just like extremely competitive about everything, about where she got, and like how she was doing. So she was always looking at what everyone else had. It was just really interesting seeing like the different dynamics. And I think that these probably play out a lot in life. But to your point, I think women don't sit around and talk about that and figure out like what am I actually like? How am I investing? The other thing I notice about men is they might make an investment and it goes bad, and they kind of it's like water off a duck's back. Like they don't seem
Yes.
very bothered. It doesn't sort of ruin them for the future. I find if I do something and it doesn't work out well, it really stays with me. Like it
Yeah.
becomes
And
a
hang,
thing.
yeah. Yeah. You feel
Yeah.
almost guilty about it. I feel almost guilty about it. Like this didn't go well for me. And now I've lost this
Yeah.
money.
And also like, oh, that's a lesson, so I shouldn't ever do that again. Not like,
Mhm.
oh, that sometimes life just goes wrong. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean I
This
made a
happened.
bad
Hmm.
decision. It's like, oh, this is catastrophic. I need to learn from that and never, ever, ever touch this thing again. So I think that's part of it as well. I mean, I hear men sometimes talk about, oh, I invested on all these shit coins and like, oh, I lost like $20,000. And they're just like super flippant. Whereas with
Yeah.
women, if that happens, they're probably more like, I am never going into this thing
I'm
again.
never doing this again. I'm never touching it. I'm going to tell everybody that they should not touch it.
Yeah,
When I go to book
definitely.
club, I'm telling everybody about that.
So I mean that's kind of my theory of it. And then I guess it's like, well, how do you change that? There was a guy that actually said to me, he was really funny. It was at the Bitcoin conference last year. He said, I think you're wasting your time.
Oh my gosh.
Just really honest. He said, if women don't want to get into Bitcoin, that's up to them. Like, if that's that, like nobody's stopping them. And I thought he kind of has a point.
That's true. That's true. But you are making an effort, but it's odd to me that your subscribers are mostly men.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't
You-
say, yeah, I mean, it depends really, because I do a lot of promos to women. So the community members are all women, but I get a
Yeah,
lot of free subscribers that are men where they'll just sign up.
yeah,
So they're obviously not attending the sessions and they're not getting the
sure.
premium content and the training programs, but they're just signing up to the newsletter because they want to read what I say and presumably reading it. So I'm a bit kind of like, oh, that's interesting because the branding is so overtly female, but it doesn't seem to put
Absolutely.
them off, you know? Whereas I feel like women will be like, oh, that looks like it's targeted at men, so I'm not gonna.
Yeah, I wouldn't look at it. Yeah, or it looks too technical. I don't want to be in that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And so that's been, I think, one of the sad things that I've noticed about Bitcoin is it's not the men keeping the women out, it's the women keeping themselves
keeping the
out.
women's out.
And it doesn't seem to be quite appealing to them yet. Whether that changes or not, I don't know. But
So, do you think it's the complexity of it at the
Um,
beginning?
I think it just seems uninteresting. And I think, by the way, that this is also one of the reasons why we see a lot more women in the shitcoin space because NFTs, Web3, it looks like more kind of like candy. It's more brightly colored. There's all this
Oh,
bright marketing.
mhm,
I think Bitcoin just looks very kind of like it's like trying to get people interested in banking. It's
mhm.
just like, oh, it's this very boring thing, and if it works well, great, but it's not fun, it's not cool, it's not pretty, it's not entertaining. It's, a very sturdy, robust technology, and it
Technology.
has lots
Yeah,
of like meaningful applications that make people's lives better. But it's a bit like somebody saying, a car analogy is good, right? A guy would
yeah,
probably be like, yeah, the engine's super efficient. It's got really fast acceleration rate. It's got this, this, this. A woman would be like, is the interior nice? I mean, I'm really
yeah, yeah.
stereotyping here, but
No, yeah. Is it beautiful outside? What's the color?
yeah, is the sound system nice? Are the seats
Yeah.
comfortable? Like that it would be the packaging that would be more obvious, I think, or more of interest. So I think that's part of the problem. It's like the packaging of Bitcoin is just well, the
So
reality of
you,
Bitcoin is it's a boring,
the
sturdy
reality.
technology. It's the car that won't break down, but
Yeah,
maybe it doesn't have the pretty pink seats, you know?
yeah. And I think it's sort of that complexity and that just having to study it, doing the work.
Yeah.
I, I think it may just be having to kind of dig in and do the work. Um,
So tell me about
Get
your
my head.
journey for studying. So when you first kind of got involved in all of this and you start hunting out mining sites for mining companies and things like
Mhm.
that, how did you educate yourself? Because mining is not as simple a concept to understand in terms of all the parts that have to come together. So how did you get through your education?
Um, I really spent just time talking to the miners themselves, really, when I was studying this, you know, the site. So I had this kind of question yesterday about kind of my sales, how do you sell stuff? And I was like, well, I just listen to people. So if you listen, you can learn. And so I just spent time listening to them about what they did and how they did it. And then, um, you know, when you listen and figure out how much real estate they need and how much power they need, and then you can go in and talk to them about that. But it was a lot of new electrical learning for me, stuff that I was not trained in. My background is in business and I have an MBA, not anything in electrical, but um, it was learning that transformer and how things are stepped down and why they have to, how they have to be stepped down. So it was really talking to the power companies about what they would have to have on their end for these guys to come, and then talking to the miners and what they had to have on their end to come, and then really studying transformers and who has the best ones, and talking to the people that I met at conferences, and you know what do you think? Who do you think has the best one? And then following those people and talking through those things. It was that kind of research of just really talking to people and trying to listen and learn about what was going on. And, you know, really learning about power was the most interesting to me. And that what may bore people to death. But it kind of just understanding, like, you know, megawatts and what people use and how much people use. And I always give this analogy because here in our town, there was a group that was going to get 100 megawatts of power. And so when people are like, oh, so is that a lot of power? And I say, well, the whole town was 100 and our whole town is 140 megawatts. And they are like, oh, okay, I get it. So it's that having that analogy of how much they are actually using, because you have to kind of get that in your brain and figure that out. And I honestly wouldn't have known that.
Yeah, I think
5
that's
years
part of the
ago.
problem when people talk about these things as well as they don't give analogies. So they'll say, oh, it's blah, blah, blah. Oh, this much hash rate or oh, this da da da. And then there isn't the corresponding because it's not language that we use day to
No,
day unless you're in the energy market or an electrician or whatever. They don't give the analogy that explains it. Like I remember when I first sort of started learning about Bitcoin mining and the environmental impact, I would hear all these presentations where people would say, oh, it helps with load balancing. And then they wouldn't
mhm,
explain what load balancing was. And when I eventually understood what they meant, I was like, if you're talking to an audience that doesn't operate an energy grid, you kind of need
you
to
got to
explain
talk
what,
about it.
yeah, you've got to say, like, this is what load balancing is and this is what it means. So, for anyone listening that doesn't know, it's like when you have an energy grid, you need to basically overproduce so that when you have
Yes,
spikes, you don't have like brownouts where you basically
big
don't have any
valleys.
power. But you then have all of this excess energy that you're basically producing or able to produce that you're not using. So, the miners come in, correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but they come in, they scoop up that spare energy when it's not
Yes,
needed and then they can power down immediately when that extra energy is needed so that those that are operating their air conditioning, their lighting, whatever it might be, can then get that extra power, but it's not wasted on a consistent basis.
that's correct.
Yay.
And yeah, that is very good. And it, and it also will give like a nice consistent load for the power company, which is really nice for them. And it's really nice too for consumers that are in the community too, because if you're not realizing that that power is not being used, then that is a cost for the electric companies as well. So, the lower the electric companies' costs are with in a miner coming in and doing that and helping out helps them. So it will in turn help keep costs for the other consumers as well. So it is a good thing, the load
Could
balance
you
that you're
could
talking
you
about.
talk about the sites then? Because when you talk about finding a site for a
Mhm.
mining company, I'm guessing you're using some of your real estate background and connections and knowledge as well. But what would you typically look for? So if I'm a mining company, I say, "Hey, I want to come to Kentucky. Can you find me some
Sure.
sites that might be appropriate?" What do you look for?
So, the first thing we're going to need to look for is like a substation that has the power capacity. So need to find that. And then we're going to have to figure out if you have that power capacity. We're going to talk to the power company and see what the rates are going to be, because if the rates aren't going to be um, competitive, then really there's no need to look any further. But that would be our first stop. And then, if the substation's there, the power looks good, then is there land next to that substation? And if it's right there and we can buy that land or lease that land right beside it, then beautiful. That's wonderful. If it's not right there and we need to go down a little bit, what's that cost for us to build those lines to that site of where we can get to? So, you know, ideal scenario, there's a substation, we can drop containers or build a building, however they want to do it, right next to the substation. So the interconnects aren't as expensive. But you know, second scenario, the land's a little bit down and we need to build some lines to go to it and get that power there. So those are my first kind of 3 or 4 things to look for. Um, I'm going to tell you though, if that power rate's not there, then incompetitive, then it's not going to be much different.
What impacts the power rate? Like, why would it be different in one area of Kentucky, say, versus another? Like, why would one site differ
Sure.
from another?
Yeah, and it's not just Kentucky that I'm talking about there, and because Kentucky is regulated, so ours are going to really be watched by the PSC a lot. Um, you know, and some co-ops may be a little bit different, and than others. Other markets may be non-regulated, which of course we have in Texas, and Ohio has PJM market. So those kind of places can be a little bit more competitive on the price. So if I'm not looking just in Kentucky and I'm looking all across the United States, there may be another site that might be more competitive if power rates less.
Wow. And when you talk about building the power lines, then how long does that take? So if you had a site that
Mm.
did need to be connected to the grid, what would be the turnaround for that to happen?
So all of that can vary, of course, depending upon how much they have to do. It can take couple weeks, or it can take a year. You know, if they have to do a substation upgrade, it might take a year. It might take 18 months. You know, the supply chain has been not grand. So I just got a bid 2 days ago, and the switch that they needed for the substation, you know, they needed 12 months for that. And I said, is this because you only need 12 months to do the work, or is this because you need 12 months to get
The part.
that equipment? And he said, we need 12 months to get that equipment. And I said, okay. So, um, so sometimes it's just the equipment that's holding us up, but always, however much the work is, it may vary.
Hmm. Wow, that's really fascinating. Um, where would you say Kentucky ranks then? I mean, like I know everyone's very much in favor of Texas as a location for mining,
Sure.
but like where would you say Kentucky ranks in the US in terms of places to domicile yourself as a miner?
Okay. Um, I don't know what everyone else's rates are. I would say, you know, maybe top 20, 15 or 20, something like that.
Hmm, okay.
Maybe less than that. At one point, like I said, we had a lot of the top hash rate, and it just depends on, you know, if everyone has different programs, right? So in my head right now, I'm thinking of 4 or 5 states that have lower prices probably than us. Um, but that doesn't also mean that they have the land or the capacity. So at that point, then if they don't have the land or they don't have the capacity, also you're just going to move on, right? Um, and then you also can throw in this other mix of, do they have any green energy with that? Because a lot of the miners, that is you know, that's one of their qualifiers. What's their energy mix, and do they have some green energy in that? Um, because they also want to be, you know, have that to show. So, you know, all of those little qualifiers have to happen to make sure that that works.
Hmm. And what else do you consult on then? Are you just consulting on this specific element or do you consult more broadly about Bitcoin topics?
This is the main thing that I work on. This is the main thing. And then I have another project that I can disclose a little bit later, but we're working on a renewable project as well in Kentucky.
Wow. I
So,
think I know what you're talking about, but we're not allowed to talk about.
right.
Yeah, that's really fascinating actually. What I was going to ask you actually though in terms of when you said some of the mining companies want a renewable mix, like what do they define as renewable? Like is there a certain set of criteria that Kentucky recognizes and certain things would fall outside of it, or is it just like the obvious, it's like a wind farm or hydro or
Yeah.
whatever? And who
Yeah.
decides what qualifies as renewable?
It's just what you said. It's wind, is it solar, is it hydro, is it, you know, is all of it coal? Because then some people are just like, "Eh, is it all coal?" So I'm not a hater of coal, so I can't say that. But I but I think that um, you know, I think that there is a place for all of those energy sources, and I think we all have to work together. And so it's sort of my taking on that. And so, but I think their energy, they just want to know what it is. If, you know, is there 20% of some sort of renewable in there? Is that power company going to be putting something in if they aren't? You know, um, are they planning to put some solar in? Are they planning to do something like that? Again, I think it's part of their story. Everyone wants to have some sort of renewable in their
Yeah.
story. So,
Yeah, that's understandable. Um, So what's your sense more broadly about the US then? Because being based in the US and being very close to like the mining industry and being sort of,
mhm.
having a really good insight into some of the legislative moves, where do you see the US as a whole being placed from a kind of crypto friendliness standpoint, shall we say? Because I know
Yeah.
that there are a lot of pushes at a federal level to create kind of difficulties for companies operating in the digital asset space more broadly. And a lot of companies are moving out and maybe going to places like the UAE, for example, where they see the
Mhm.
regulation being more friendly. But where do you think the trajectory is going with that? Like, what's your sense being boots on the ground?
Um, I don't know that I have a clear answer for that. I think every day kind of presents a new kind of set of task and things to work on. And so I think, we just had, you know, Lee go to bat for Riot, down there. And I know there's a group going to Washington next week for everyone um, to the governments and talk to their people. And so I think that we are all trying to move in the same direction. But my guess is that we're going to have regulation and maybe will not like it. I don't know. I don't have a good read on that just yet. Um, I think I don't think that we'll ever adopt Bitcoin as our currency or it's going to be our only currency, but I think that more people will be taking it in on their own.
Yeah,
Am I
interesting. I mean,
making any sense?
yeah, it does. I mean, it's hard to tell really because you don't know which way the wind is going to blow. But I've got to be honest, I'm in some respects quite surprised at how hostile the US has become towards Bitcoin because somebody, I think it's Marty Bent makes this comment a lot on Twitter where he says like Bitcoin is more American than the dollar. And I tend to agree in terms of like the values of
Yeah,
the
the
modern
values of it.
US state and how it was founded. Yeah, it feels to me very much that it just seems something like the US ought to embrace, not just from an ideological standpoint, definitely that, but also from an economic standpoint, because the debt is just so crazy and out of control that in a way I just think the Bitcoin is the thing that will balance it because the value
That
of the
might
Bitcoin will
balance it.
go
Yeah,
up. Yeah, I mean, as the dollar plummets, the value of the Bitcoin will go up. So if you want to be able to repay your debt, I know that's probably like a it's probably more likely there'll be currency collapse before that happens. But it seems to me
I
like it
would
would
agree
be
with
a
that.
sensible strategy, particularly as the US government is one of the biggest holders of Bitcoin because they've seized Bitcoin, from alleged illicit
Exactly.
activities. So they hold a ton of Bitcoin. So they've got a really good they would be able to hodl it and they should hodl it and it might provide a buffer against some of the kind of just general crashing of the dollar that's going on. So I'm kind of surprised really that there is that hostility because I think actually if you were really trying to run the country in a sensible way, you'd be like, this is actually something that we should
This is
encourage.
good for us. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So in my head though, when you say that, I think that it's like um that's like the common sense thing. Like you and I are thinking that's the common sense thing. That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of debt, and this is a problem. This is a way to solve that problem. And then in my head, I think that's the government, and that's almost too easy, right? So there's not. It's almost like it's a threat when you look at it that way. That hostility towards it. It's almost like it's a threat to what they're doing. Is the way I would picture that in my head.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like what's happening is that the wealth of the US citizens is being plundered. So it's like rats coming off, jumping off of a sinking ship and taking what they can with them. So I would posit that people in government are not thinking long term and are not thinking about the well-being of the country long term. They're thinking, how can I get as much of this wealth and get it out, into my
Right
own
now.
pockets before the ship sinks.
Yeah.
Um, and this thing is a threat to me having access to the money printer where I can then plunder
Yeah.
the wealth of the country. But
And get mine.
yeah, that kind of attitude, I mean, I guess that's maybe human nature for some people, but it's a weird short-term way of thinking because I'm like, if things get that bad in the country, sure, you can plunder the wealth, but you're going to have to leave. You're going to have to leave and go and live somewhere else because where you are will be unlivable. So surely it will be better to do what you can to make the US as economically sound as you possibly can, rather than fighting against this technology that is actually going to be a net benefit for you as a nation. It's very
It
strange.
works.
Mm.
Yeah, it is works. I mean, it works and can't help them. I was um, reading, I guess, and didn't really realize this, but Africa is one of like has adopted Bitcoin and part of Africa, and it's just um, that was surprised me.
I think it was actually the Central African Republic. They
Yeah.
announced that they
Okay.
were going to, but then I've never been. I think it got backpedaled. So they said,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, very shortly after El Salvador made it Bitcoin legal tender, I think Central African Republic said that they were going to do the same or they were going to put some kind of legislation in place. But I think
Don't
it
think it's
didn't.
gone through.
I don't think it went through yet.
Okay.
No, I don't, not
Okay.
yet.
Okay. I was just thinking that I hadn't, that's probably why I hadn't heard it. Maybe I just was reading the different article, but was maybe before that because I was thinking I hadn't heard.
Well, I looked into it at the end of, when was it? It was 2022, December 2022. I was putting together a training session and I was writing about El Salvador. And I'd read that the Central African Republic were adopting it as legal tender or doing something like that. So I then went and tried to find what had happened, and all I could find was that it had been put on pause. So that was all I was able to kind of.
Okay.
I don't know whether that
Okay.
situation has since
Well, thank
changed.
you for clearing that up in my head
Yeah, I'd
because
have
I
to
was,
Google it. I mean, this is probably like my stuff's out of date as well, but it would be, yeah, it'd be interesting to see how the game theory plays out because a lot of the UAE states are becoming very friendly to crypto now. You know, Hong
yes.
Kong is issuing an ETF, which you could argue maybe there's a different driver behind that. Um, but
Yeah.
you're seeing Singapore being quite friendly to like Bitcoin slash crypto companies. All of those regions are being much more friendly. And I'd
Yes.
say the EU is doing what the EU always does, which is basically try to stifle any kind of productivity. And the US just seems to be ideologically threatened, at least at a federal level.
At the
Um,
federal level. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
by the idea that this thing is going to sort of usurp the cantillionaire's access to the money printer. But I hope you guys get past it. Canada's funny because Canada was very pro Bitcoin in many ways. Like we had an ETF since
Yeah.
2021. Um, but I think because the current prime minister's brother is a Bitcoiner and is very vocal against the prime minister's administration. I think that they've become a bit more hostile now as a
Oh,
result of that. Yeah, yeah,
okay.
which is interesting. So I think there's
That
some
is
of that.
interesting.
Yeah, I don't think the Prime Minister of Canada really understands Bitcoin, to be honest. If I'm really candid, I don't think he gets it. I mean, he's
Yeah.
he's economically fairly illiterate. Um, so I think he doesn't really understand what it is, but I suspect that because of some of the familial issues, that he's maybe a bit more anti it now because,
Yeah.
his brother's rubbing him up the wrong way or something like that. I don't know.
It's more of a personal issue than a Bitcoin issue.
I kind of feel like, yeah, because Canada was actually way ahead of the US in many respects, like
Yes.
way
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah.
And then it suddenly seems to have put the brakes on really for no apparent reason. So yeah, I think I
And
suspect that
very
that's
good
something.
rates up in Canada and mining conditions. So,
Well, yeah, and they've put a lot of the brakes on that now as well in some of the
yes.
jurisdictions, which is ridiculous because like, gosh, you could make so much money from doing this, and you have all of yeah, as you say, all the right conditions from a climate
Mhm.
and a sort of a topography, I guess you'd
I
say.
knew they had paused it in some places, but yeah, I mean the rates were great, and again
Yeah,
the climate, not a lot of problems with that, and mines having to shut down. So that's kind of
yeah,
a shame too.
nice and cold.
Nice and cold all the time. I don't know how you like that, um, but
Oh,
that's good for you, not for me.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
Well, thank you so much, Heather. This has been super interesting. So do keep me posted on all things Kentucky because it's fascinating hearing what's going on at state level. I just wanted to ask you for anyone listening where they can find the Kentucky Blockchain Council and where they can find your consulting website as well if they want to get hold of you.
sure. So KentuckyBlockchain.com and I'm sorry, KentuckyBlockchainCouncil.com, and then Proof Consult is the website. Is our
Okay,
other
is
website?
that dot com?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, proof consult. No S on the end, so proof
No,
consult.
with an S, with an S.
Proofconsult.com.
Consults.
Okay,
Hmm.
perfect.
Hmm.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for doing all that work.
Thank you
You've
for
got,
your time. I appreciate
yeah,
it.
I'm sure you've got a lot cut out for you with the Kentucky Blockchain Council, but good luck with that and yeah, onwards.
All right. And I will see you soon. And thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate it.
It was my pleasure.
All right.